Hi there, my name is JF Murray and I am the author of Fling, an Irish romantic comedy. And today we are going to just be kind of discussing what is behind the rise of romantic comedies making a comeback, and even just the revival of romance as a genre in general. So I have kind of quite a few kind of theories on this, and I think, the world in general can always use a little bit more romance. And personally for me as an author, romance isn't necessarily, just something as simple as flowers and love hearts. For me, it's an idealization of the world we live in. So I consider myself a romantic author, and the way for me in my writing that kind of translates into I present the world on the page not as it is necessarily, but as it ought to be. So I think it's always nice when when you read a book that there's an element of escapism to it. I think there's plenty of people who like to read and see, all the terrible things that are happening in the world, represented in a book. And sometimes I do read like that. But in general, I do love, the element of escapism that especially comes with romantic comedy and romance in general. Because, for example, if you're walking through an airport, you're heading to the sun, you're going to be on the beach, you're probably going to want a book that kind of captures that kind of same vibe, that kind of same essence, where you're not in your kind of typical life, you're taking time off work, and you want to be in the vibe of escapism because you're on your holiday and you don't necessarily want your book to be too heavy or too kind of melancholic. Sometimes you can like that, but I think on a holiday vibe, especially if you're heading off abroad, I think the romantic comedy genre and romance, that the element of escapism and kind of just escaping into a different world, for me, is what literature is all about. And I think that's something we see now with trends in the world, in the publishing industry. We see that romance has become, this massive genre, whereas a few years ago it just wouldn't have been as big. Romance has always been around, of course, but it has had this explosion in popularity. Authors like Emily Henry, there's a lot of kind of authors working within this space, and they're enjoying a lot of success at the moment. And I'm very lucky that I'm a romance author at this time, because there's so much opportunity, and people are just really connecting with romantic stories. So I think it all goes back to our, just the human desire to escape into a fantasy world, which for me is what reading a book is all about. And the romantic comedy genre and romance in general is the perfect genre for someone who wants to just forget about their life for an hour or two a day and just, escape. And that is a big theme in Fling itself. And if anyone is a fan of the Pina Colada song, which is also titled Escape, Fling might be of interest to you, because there's some similarities there between the two. The question of tropes is something I find it very fascinating in general, because again, 10 years ago, I think books nearly tried to hide their tropes a little bit, because they almost didn't want to be seen as cliche, or they didn't want to be seen as, oh, this has been done before. But what we're seeing now is that people are happy to engage with art that has been done kind of similarly before, but they know that if they like this particular trope, or if they like this genre, that's going to be something that they're happy to read again and again. For example, you might think to yourself, oh, enemies to lovers has been done quite a lot, and if you've read one enemies to lovers, you've read them all. But what we're seeing now with authors is that there's so much potential for it to be, new twists on these tropes, and I think that's what people are looking for each time. A lot of people read the same book over and over again, but people are always excited for a new twist on something they love. And especially, it applies to a lot of genres, to be honest. Like, for example, fantasy. There's usually going to be dragons, let's be honest, but people are still finding ways to come up with new stories that make dragons more and more interesting and more cool, which I didn't think was possible, because you think dragons have always just been dragons. But it's amazing how authors can reinvent genres, reinvent tropes. And you see that a lot, especially with them. There's a lot of, one thing I like, I've seen it in films and I've seen it in some books as well, the kind of, classics kind of being reinterpreted from a kind of a queer perspective, which I think is really interesting, where it's almost taking the traditional, male and female lead, but it's, maybe applying it to more of a sapphic romance, or more of a gay romance. And I think the fact that we know what we like as readers, like, for example, Fling has a kind of a second chance romance arc, And you know, there's some people who absolutely love that, and some people who said, no, I only read enemies to lovers. They know exactly what they like. But I think that's very good that readers they know what they're looking for, because it means that when you go into a bookshop, your chances of being disappointed are probably a little bit lessened, because you know, if someone picks up the blurb of Fling and they read the blurb, they're like, okay, this is the book for me, and this is the book I'm going to be taking on holidays, this is what I'm going to be reading on the beach. And they almost know, based on the tropes and based on the blurb, that this is a book for them. And of course it applies on the opposite side as well, where people might say, no, I only read hockey romances, which is a really big genre, which I didn't think it was. But there's some people who say, no, if there's no hockey in this book, I'm not reading it, which to me is interesting, because a hockey wouldn't make or break a book for me. But it's great that readers are so engaged almost with what they like, and it's good for authors, because it means there's always going to be someone who likes your tropes, or who likes your genre, or who likes your writing. Thank you so much for watching. Once again, my name is J.F. Murray, and my debut novel, Fling, if you're interested in second chance romances or Irish or romantic comedies with more of an Irish twist, my novel Fling is on shelves now. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed.